Today's episode of PJ and the Beard, we're doing another installment of the interview series, and this particular interview is part 2 of our interview with David Barber from Barber Electronics.
Right. If you didn't see part 1, look up in the cards for a link to that. In that part of the interview, David talks to us about his entire pedal line, current pedal line, and goes through the pedals and the thought and inspiration behind them.
So that was the pedal line that you're currently producing, and thanks for dragging them out with you tonight. And so part of what we like to do in these interviews is like find out about the person behind the product, and it has your name on it, right? So
indeed it does.
So you are the company, and my guess, as in most interviews we've done, this was not like you at an early age, you're like, I want to be a pedal manufacturer.
Nope, it never is. You don't know that there's a such thing, a vocation of pedal making. It's nothing you imagine. Every pedal builder I know of, unless they started in the last few years, has that story. If you started in the 90s like I do, it's always the same. Everybody from my era says it's accidental.
Yeah.
So.
And that's been true for the interviews that we've done.
Yeah.
For the most part, a few younger guys, maybe not quite as much, but
yeah, it's always I tinkered with stuff.
Right.
I made something, somebody else liked it. I made another one. I made some money. I decided I didn't want to make a lot of money, so I made pedals.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Forgot how I made it and had them send it back to me. I looked inside and reminded myself what it looked like.
I don't often forget how I made. Sometimes versions, but the overall, like how the circuit works, I'm pretty good about that.
Right. But in our conversation, we like to call it the pre-interview because we like to sound all formal around here. Talked a little bit about like you did grow up in a bit of a technical home. Like your dad was in
he worked
satellites
at ComSat Labs, so he was producing the substrates, the components that they use for the satellites went on, and so he's involved in sputtering and different types of plasma etching and things like that. And so the language of electricity and electronics was something that he tried to make sure was part of me growing up in the house, and he knew that I liked that stuff and I found it fascinating. So it was there, and it was there when I needed it, luckily, because I learned enough just goofing off around the house and by just a need to fix things. I mean, when you're young and you play music or anything, you don't have a pocket full of cash.
Right.
So that just leads you in. It does tend to be the same way. Everybody kind of has that. Most people don't, say, oh, I spoke to my parents and I told them I'd like to be a pedal builder, and they pulled out, $100,000 and sent me to pedal builder school, and right. that's just not the story. When I learned all about supply chain and how to have the correct components arriving at the correct time, that's just not what happens.
Yeah, because in this business, we had conversations too. Like, there's been times that your business has really kind of shut down for external forces that you weren't really able to control, and one of them being back in the early 2000s with the anthrax scare in Maryland, being that you're regional, so just all kinds of things that you can't plan for.
Right, and so to make that whole, during the anthrax scare, it was because the packages were being sent out of the post offices in Maryland and D.C. At least that's what the people felt. And so dealers and a lot of people didn't want to take packages that we would send when we were in Maryland from that region. The fear was that high at that time. Now, eventually the desire for pedals overwhelmed them and they were willing to take chances. But
very strong.
But yeah, there was months along that period of time. You want to segue into what that produced, or do you want to ask me a question to make me do
Well, I just wanted to kind of talk about how these things you're trying to figure out as you go, right? And then you have crazy things like that could never dream of, but yet you're trying to make a living and probably employing a few people, and you just kind of have to keep soldiering on. And being an entrepreneur is already a risk without those types of things.
For me, it works if I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I just think of myself as paying mortgage or rent, and that's kind of buying food and things like that. At times, it gets a lot better than that. I don't want to portray it as the worst thing, but it's a really hard industry now. It's because there's just way too many, and right. It's fun. So I understand why people would want to do it. And like I'll say to you before, the bar of entry is incredibly low. You can find somebody who'll do the entire thing for you as long as you have cash for your first order. And you can call yourself a builder even though you're not doing anything. You don't even know how the pedal works. And if somebody sends one back to have it repaired, you're just like, I have to give them another one, because if it's not the paint came off, I don't know what happened.
Right.
But that's just part of it. Anything that's fun like this, that's intriguing and provides a really valuable thing. I mean, before the pedal explosion happened, there were pedals. There were a lot of cool pedals. But to the degree that there are now, where you know that if you have an amp that has a fairly even bass tone to start with, there's probably a pedal out there that'll get you whatever your new gig or your continuing gig or the new songs you've added for your gig, whatever that requires, you're going to be able to add that in. And you can buy unreal stuff that fits in very small boxes. People talk about racks. 80s was like, I brought 2 or 3 refrigerators in. I saw Steve Vai say something about this the other day, that he had like 3 refrigerators or something like that. And no one was trying to build serious devices and pedals yet. Maybe TC Electronics had some little EQs and things like that were pretty serious devices and pedals. But one of the things that happened was people got more serious about what it was. It wasn't just a little fun sound that you clicked on for a song. It became the sound. I mean, people talk about always on pedals. Right. Well, always on pedals can be a compressor or an overdrive for most people. Sometimes it's an EQ. Their amp doesn't have quite the EQ they want, so they have an EQ they always leave on. Or there's some reverb. My God, I can't exist without reverb thought, that kind of thing. And so that didn't happen back then. So the pedals got better and better and better, to the point that when people say, are racks coming back? It was like, well, why would they come back? Just so you can work on your muscles and you can carry something big. Because so much of that that thinking power that created a nice delay has now been miniaturized. And so the electronics that had to be very complex and be supported by large structures like a rack now can be fit onto a small chip and programmed by somebody who is given the information by the company who made the chip on how they can program it, and they can call it whatever they want. They can say that they've made the exact sound of a certain studio or a certain guitar rig and use a famous name, or at least conjure that image up in your mind. With analog electronics, it never was trying to condense something that was huge, because with analog, you're trying to keep it simple. Most people are, if you can, because the more stage after stage after stage you build up, usually it sounds like the further and the further and the further you're getting from the source, which was your guitar and you're playing. You want that stuff there. You want it to feel like it's popping out of the speakers. So it was just a matter of being willing to look at previous designs and say, I'm not going to look at this like I'm trying to count every penny that's going into it. I can now look at this and say, it can have an output buffer if it needs it. Or if that's superfluous and you're using the buffer because you wanted to use an FET switch, then you could say, well, now I don't need that. I know I can omit that. It wasn't doing a job that helped me with the actual sound of it. It was doing a job that helped me be able to use a certain type of switching or make it, whatever kind of topology that you think works best for your design. And then, of course, that you could use better quality components. And that's kind of a wide spectrum of things, the way they're talked about with pedal designers. A lot of pedal guys say highest possible quality components. Well, a good Alps pot that you would put in the mixing console will easily cost you $50 per pot. So when a guy sells a $150 pedal and tells you the highest possible quality components, it's not happening. You can buy capacitors that cost $100 a piece. You can buy resistors that cost, I think, Rottersteins or something like $20 or $30 at least a piece for these tantalum resistors. You can go really far with that stuff. So I think most of us try to use better quality components than we had typically seen, and what was common to find in good audio devices, but ones that didn't break the bank. So you would find in some good quality mixing consoles. On top of that, things like fuzz pedals, actually a lot of them sound really good when you make them with the cheap stuff. The cheap stuff that's a little bit more smeared, because a fuzz pedal can be so etched sounding. It can get so harsh if you're not careful. And so if you've got, if you're using capacitors in the signal path that have a little bit more kind of like ghosting effect, like they're kind of smeared a little bit. Sometimes it smears it in a nice kind of finger paint way. Just put a little analogy on it, and it's prettier. So sometimes making that fuzz pedal for the dirt cheap price makes a big difference. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach it, and it really comes down to execution of design is usually more important than design itself. You can look at something and say, is it transistors? Is it op amps, like a chip? Or is it a tube or something like that? But a good designer can take that, what they're working with, and say, I can maximize this, I can tune it. And they usually know intrinsically before they start, I think this is a good job for a few transistors, or I think I'm going to need an op amp because of this specific thing. So I'm not sure if that spun off into another place from where you were going.
No, it kind of talks a lot about, because part of the question I'd like to ask too is like, you're the guy, name's on the pedal. By the way, that's one of Jason's always on pedals. That's how I know about you. Barber, the director, he had to go take it off his one board to make sure we had the whole gang assembled here tonight. But so it did kind of talk about, we talked about, well, where do you spend your time? Well, clearly, for you, you're thinking through the design and how can I do this and not compromise, but I'm going to make a great thing, but I'm going to put the stuff in it that it needs to have and not just other stuff so I can say that it's in there. So yeah, I think it kind of gives you a little bit of insight into kind of your approach.
It does, and it's not even like so. My approach is often that the best ideas come to me when I'm not in the lab, so to speak, in my shop. So I can work through a problem, and I'm too close to it. I'm trying to solve it. I love biking. I go out. I do a lot of cycling.
Yep.
I'm on my mountain bike. My heart rate's at 165 beats a minute, and it's there. And so when you're in the shop, like everything that's going on, the company that's supposed to be shipping you your packing materials and boxes for shipping stuff is, back ordered on something that you really need, and there's a problem that you see, so you can't ship things just because of something stupid like that. You're trying to solve this problem, another problem. It's all cluttering your thought. When your heart's beating fast and I'm on the bike, it kind of all just drops away. And the next thing you know, there's just this one thing. I can focus. I can think, oh. So for me, biking is like what some people think of meditation. I would probably get bored during meditation. I'd probably fall asleep. That's no knock against meditation. I'm just too hyperactive. And biking for me provides that. Biking just provides something where I go and my mind gets very still and I can actually think about things clearly. And so that's my designing place is more, it's not something that happens with a lab coat on. And I'm sure you can't picture me with a lab coat anyway, but
I did the first time you said it.
Exactly. But it's not something that happens in a shop. It never happens into an oscilloscope. I never look at sound because I know that no one listens to anything that way. I solve problems by looking at sound once in a great while, but to me, I can work faster with other tools that I've developed that were made for different industries that allow me to work quickly through troubleshooting, which is a lot of the areas where you would use methods of looking at sound. Methods of looking at sound, though, that can be good, like if you're designing an EQ and you need it to be flat at a certain point, you want a certain amount of response after you add or subtract resistance from a circuit. It can be good for that. But I'm designing for guitar players, and guitar players, there's no reference. I mean, guitar players talk about, I did this with all the knobs at noon. I don't, other than on the LTD, which has a tone knob that I wanted to be able to work at noon. The rest of the knobs, not noon, but just that one, because it allows you to have a central point where everything's kind of even, and then as you add more top, you get the top and it slightly cuts the bottom. As you bring it down, it slightly brings the bass. It brings the bass up and then brings the top off and slightly brings the bass up. So for things like that, sometimes I'll consult like some visual type devices to help with it. But I really try to design by ear and just by working it out, away from them. And a lot of stuff fails. I mean, that's part of what designing is. As a matter of fact, that's kind of what designing is not necessarily blowing stuff up, but coming up with a great idea. And it's the thing it's one of the 100 things that's sitting on my prototype shelf that's just didn't happen. You have to make a lot of failures to make something good.
Yeah. So part of this pedal building journey, have you had moments, because I was saying, are there celebrities that maybe, you look at them as clients and people, have you had moments of like, wow, I can't believe I got to meet that person, or that person used my gear? Moments like that where you're like, wow, I just never thought, when I'm beating on the drums when I'm 8 and I'm playing guitar growing up, that somebody like that would be using one of my pieces of gear.
There's been, we don't deal with artists, that were, growing up, kind of my idols on a daily basis. That's not really what, even a lot of the big guitar manufacturers don't necessarily have, that regular clientele walking through it. You're primarily making stuff for guys playing in their living room on the bandstand and things like that. But yeah, when I find out that Jerry Cantrell is using our direct drive low gain pedal and that's stowed away in his rack, but I get the picture from his tech that says, this is part of Jerry's rig. And I know it wasn't there because I didn't make it back when he made Facelift or something like that. But I know that it's the sound that he uses live now for Rooster, for the breakdown parts. Christopher Cross was a huge artist, when I was growing up, and won Grammys, and still to this day, you see him on the Jerry Fallon show or something like that when he goes on there to guest star. People really get into it, and getting calls from him telling me what he thinks of the product and ordering more and continuing to use them, and he tells other people about them. Like, you never see that kind of stuff from somebody who's in a position like him.
Right.
They have other stuff that they're doing, but he takes the time out to say, call this guy David, and I use his pedals, and it's worked out well for me, and I think it could work for your sound too. That's so nice that he would take the time. That kind of stuff means a lot. Richard Thompson, playing, Albert Hall with David Gilmour for that big, concert for his birthday, and knowing that it's a game changer on the stage, that's stuff you don't get enough,
right?
So getting to talk to Eric Johnson on the phone and just having a conversation with him about fuzz pedals. I didn't even get to sell him a fuzz pedal, but hearing him talk about that he listens to fuzz in pixels. I hope I'm not ruining anything about that. There's enough about 9-volt batteries and flat washers already.
Right, exactly.
But he does, and I totally know what he meant. I totally know that he's like, there's the big pixels and the small pixels, and I'm not going to tell you which pixels he likes. I'll let him do that. But that's a cool thing.
We're having him on next week.
To hear, right, just to hear the vernacular of a famous artist like that, and somebody who's gotten sounds like he's been able to achieve. That stuff, it always means a lot. It always makes you ride high for a little bit, and then the next day it's somebody calling and saying, trying to solve this problem in my living room because my dog's not happy with my sound. And you go right back to, that's important too. I got to fix it. That dog's got to like what he's hearing.
Yeah. Because your name's on the pedal. We go back to that.
There's other people that I work with. I should say, one of the two of the guys that have been with me the longest, close to 20 years, one of them longer than 20 years, Ronnie Santmeyer, built the majority of all of our custom shop stuff. So whenever anything used to come out of B Custom was our custom shop. And currently we're not doing it. Ron's got a really busy gig with an act that plays all around the country and does some international gigs too. And he has a recording studio that he's busy with. So lately we haven't been doing the custom shop stuff. And I have another guy named Britt Steele who's been with me for about 18 years. Started back in Hampstead, Maryland with me. And these guys, they know everything that I do. I can speak to them in a shorthand that allows me to not have to give, tremendous explanations when I have a new product, when I have a custom design, when I have a prototype I'm working through, and I need them to do some of the heavy lifting of I don't have time to make this thing today. I need you to get this much done on it for me, and then I'm just going to put those last 2 diodes in because they're special, or something like that. And that those guys are there, and so that's a big part. I wouldn't want to think that just because the name Barber is on there, that Ronnie Santmeyer and that Britt Steele don't get real credit for being there for years and making things go. And my wife, Andrea Recca, always there. I mean, I bounce everything off of her. She handled the phones for years. She's a therapist now, but I think that's what she was doing when she was handling the phones. Our company's pretty much therapy. But she knew the answers to all the technical questions. She would hear me repeat this stuff over and over again. Mm-hmm. Your guitar is making noise. Okay, does it make the same noise when your guitar's volume knob is all the way down as it is all the way up? Do you have the rest of the pedals unplugged? Or are they all plugged in but turned off? She knew the troubleshooting as well or better than anybody at any company. And still to this day, when I bring artwork in, so from Bronson Wagner, our artist who pretty much makes all the look of all the pedals, I bounce it off her. Do the colors look right? Because I'm colorblind. I don't know. So the only person in my house that knows color is Andrea, and I bounce it off the other guys too. And I have other people that I go to, but yeah. So it's more than just one guy, but it is contained. Like no one's assembling Barber pedals who assembles a bunch of other brands of pedals or any other brands of pedals. It's just, those two guys that have been working with me. And we've been, as large as, 5 or 6 builders and a total of 8 people in the company at different times. When there was less pedal companies and that increased demand on us, tremendously, so just kind of roll with the punches on that. But I kind of like where we are now, 3 guys.
That's great. One thing I've learned from our time together tonight is, first of all, you're incredibly passionate about what you do. You kind of don't stop until you get what you want, and then you find a way to make it better. We're adding a different toggle switch. But some of the things that I've learned from you tonight is that, you mentioned color blindness. That was one thing you mentioned before. So there's a guy trying to do stuff colorblind.
That's a lot of fun with electronics because everything, the resistors are all color coded, and so
we don't want you on the bomb squad. We want the red and the black wire to stay the same.
You don't want me on the bomb squad. So I have to do everything with and I learned to work this way from the time I was 8 years old. I have a multimeter on the bench, and so when a resistor comes off, I can hold both of the leads with one hand and just straight across the leads on the resistor and can see the value as fast as somebody can hold it up and focus on it, especially if you're getting a little bit older and presbyopia says you have to hold the resistor this far away, and now you can't see it either.
So there's that, and then, not sure how well known it is, but you shared it with us, and Jason had a little thought of that you struggled with tinnitus. So it's something that you've, in addition to being colorblind and finding ways to work around that, you're building.
I'm a mutant all the way around.
Yeah, you're building pedals with, I don't know if we'll call it a condition.
And I think that is something that probably should be seen as a common thread among audio professionals, top engineers, the most famous guitar players, Jeff Beck, tinnitus that limits what he feels he can do. And I won't go through the names of a lot of the other guys because he's been public about it, but Pete Townshend obviously was public about it. And I've seen other guys. So you name a top guitar player, and they almost all have a tinnitus story. It is an accidental and unfortunate red badge of courage in the industry. I mean, engineers who work in front of monitors for 12 and 14 hours a day, it's almost unavoidable. A front of house guy that sits in front of a band that demands to be so loud that everybody goes home and for a week remembers the show because their ears are still ringing. Right. Well, his ears are ringing the same way. And, I have a degree of that changes day to day. Some days it can be kind of loud, and on those days I try to do simplified work. That's not the day that I pull out a new design and voice it perfectly. And then I have days where I wake up that my ears are, pretty golden on those days, and my hearing was not affected, in any way, significantly by the ringing. It's ringing, but my hearing, it's good stuff. So, and my ability to make references is still really, good quality. So on a day when I wake up and my ears are quiet and kind of calm, I'm thinking clear the schedule, do all the design work, listen to things carefully. And then in with that is I just never crank up an amp anymore. And so there's a lot of designers who think, well, the only way to make a good sounding pedal is to crank it up. Well, I used to design that way. That's how I designed it all the way up until, when I say design, up until 1998 to the end of 97, I should say, I primarily just worked on guitars and amplifiers. I was a guitar and amp tech, a studio technician, had a recording studio, weekend musician, the whole bit. And right on the dividing line of when I started to suffer from tinnitus and I realized this is ringing and it's ringing in a way that bothers me and I don't want it to get any worse and I don't want to take a chance on that. Everything I designed pedal-wise that's available today and that's been available pretty much in the line came after. Right. So designing with it means you don't crank up, but intrinsically from all those years of cranking up 100-watt Marshalls and 50-watt Marshalls and high watts and Fenders, what the response will be if you plug the pedal into it and it's got too much low end, it's going to push it too far. And there's ways to check it. There's ways without having a lot of volume, and people should learn these because you can protect your own hearing. Today you have ways to load the amplifier, like a reactive load. A lot of the reactive loads have built-in IRs, so an impulse response that allows you to sound just like you have your favorite speaker cabinet on it and a great mic. And you can listen back to it through a set of studio monitors or sometimes like an amplifier. You can use it and work at the same levels I'm talking to you right now. And you don't need to deafen yourself to know how the tube amp is responding that you're going into because you can hear it without going so loud. When the room is loud, you're exciting everything in the room. So you're exciting ambience and frequencies that come off of everything in the room that might go. So if we started playing loud in this room, these guitars would start singing, things would rattle along the walls and things like that. And that all ends up as part of what you think is the sound. When you play quieter, it's the same as an engineer who learns to mix quieter. You tend to make decisions that translate a lot more. And so that's really what, that I did. It wasn't something that I had to spend a lot of adjustment time to because there was no going back. Once I noticed that my ears were ringing and I had professionals working with me who were considered the foremost in research and understanding and treatment of tinnitus. And when I say treatment, there's ways to try to help people cope better, but not to reduce the noise. It's going to be there. And the amount that coping works is the amount that you're attached to sound being perfect. So if you're an engineer, well, it's really hard to get around something whistling along in your ear some days. And so that's why I don't try to work on those days. I can troubleshoot things. I can tell if something's a little noisy on a day like that, but I don't think it's hindered me, and it probably saved my hearing because most guys will continue to play amps at 100 decibels while they're designing a pedal, and there's no reason for your amp to be all that loud if you're designing a pedal. You're probably not playing it through the amp much louder than Unity in most cases, except for boost pedals. Even then, you're only achieving an extra 6 to 15 decibels, and 15 usually sounds pretty rotten to hit that first tube on a tube amp. It's a little too much. So the volume is a byproduct. And I mean, earlier tonight we had all the pedals out. We wanted to play them, but I take all the heat for that one.
That's
you know,
fine,
it would have been a little loud in the room
Mm-hmm.
to try to play them, and we're going to do that another date. You
That's
know,
right.
and that's the answer to the tinnitus question.
No, it's just fascinating. Again, I've kind of, you know, as we've sat here this evening, just kind of formulated that. I mean, I just feel like a lot of things you've overcome, and it's inspiring that you've overcome things that might be a problem in what the industry that you do, but you found a way to do it. You're passionate about what you do. You've got that thing that can take you away. You can get on a bike and go have brilliant thoughts or mindless thoughts or whatever. Like you had a brilliant thought, but like just so you can disconnect and
Break bones.
You know, it sounds like you got a good team that you have. It's because you do some aggressive cycling, not really passive.
Everybody falls
trails.
once in a while. It's just
But you know, it sounds like you know you got a good support structure around you. You got two long-term employees. Your wife is sounds like she's all in. I mean, it's been really fascinating to talk to you and hear and just catch the passion you have and the technical knowledge is like off the chart. It's been fantastic.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on your YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
Come to some random stranger's
I was
house.
going to say, inviting me into your home, into the studio.
That's right.
I think right there, we're going to wrap this up. So we have, we're putting out new stuff typically every Wednesday and Saturday around noon. So subscribe. Man, it's getting to the point where I can't even remember what I need to say here.
Ring the bell.
Subscribe, ring the bell.
Smash the bell.
Hit notifications for more of this kind of stuff. But more importantly, I think tonight, www.barberelectronics.com.
I think that's correct. That sounds accurate.
If it's not, Google Barber Electronics and you'll find it. But definitely stop by his website, check out what they're doing. You saw most of the pedals here tonight. Great stuff. Can't speak highly enough, and we really appreciate you taking the time. He took the time to come to us, which is awesome, and we're really thrilled about that. So, with that, Pat,
I am PJ on behalf of the Beard, reminding you no matter what you hear, you never have too much gear.